So the first talk we're going to do is by Noel Conway. Now, those of you who don't know, Noel Conway is a long-standing member of ours, and about 3 or 4 years ago he developed motor neuron disease, and he is now has very little movement at all. He can just move his finger. It doesn't stop him working very hard, not only with legal things. He's just published a book, which I've just read, and he's got another couple of books and his autobiography on the way. He's been fighting through the courts for the right, for the change of the law on assisted dying. In the last 2 years, he's given us an update of his work, and he's written this for me to read to you about his present situation. So this is the first presentation from Noel Conway. Dear colleagues, Simon has asked me to bring you up to date with where we are regarding the assisted dying campaign. In July last year, we obtained permission to appeal against the original divisional High Court judgment which rejected my claim that UK law breaches Article 8 of the human rights legislation recognised by the EU, the UK and the UN. We thought we had a good chance of appealing successfully, since the Permission's Justice identified 7 different grounds by which the previous decision of the High Court was deficient. The strong recommendation was that both the legal, ethical and moral arguments for and against assisted dying should be examined in much more detail than it had been. When the decision of the Appeals Court finally came through in autumn last year, we were dismayed to discover they had merely reiterated the earlier court's findings, rejecting or refusing to consider our own extensive evidence and witness statements, and quoted in a very one-sided way from evidence supplied by the opponents of change. Again, we thought we had a very good case for bringing a further appeal and applied to the Supreme Court. A hearing was held in November 2018 to determine whether we might proceed to the Supreme Court. We had obtained a new lead barrister, David Pennick QC, regarded as the best lawyer in the UK on human rights. Furthermore, 2 of the 3 panel Supreme Court judges, Lady Hale and Lord Kerr, had stated in the case of Nicholson and Lamb in 2014 that in their view the applicant's human rights had been wrongly denied by the existing Act in 1961, the existing Suicide Act in 1961, which maintains a blanket ban on all assisted dying cases. We felt, therefore, quite positive about at least being granted permission to proceed. That didn't happen. In the 8th paragraph judgment from that hearing, the justices expressed their sympathy for my case, but reiterated that the grounds given by previous courts should stand without further investigation or debate. We were given no reason for this other than, in their view, my case was unlikely to succeed in the Supreme Court. Effectively, I and everyone else clamouring for change have been denied justice. I understand from sources close to Lady Hale that she had sounded out the Supreme Court justices and concluded that the case had no chance of success despite her support. From my point of view, this is a complete denial of British justice, which should have allowed the arguments to be explored in full and each justice given the chance to ask questions and make up their own minds accordingly. There is some consolation from the statement by the Permissions Court that they recognise the legitimacy of the British courts being able to make a judgment on the issue. Secondly, they acknowledge that Article 8 human rights provision was undermined by British current law. Even if we'd been allowed to present our case at the Supreme Court, it would still have been up to Parliament to change the law. Some people in the past have argued that going through the legal process is not worth it. I'm beginning to think they're right. The forces of tradition and paternalism remain very powerful in the conservative institution of the legal system. That is not the end of the matter, however, as I continue to fight, as others do, including Humanists UK, for recognition of the right to die, a basic human right. Today, I'm pleased to see the Daily Mirror has published a front-page article on the decision of the Royal College of Physicians to survey its members on the issue. They are currently opposed. The editorial in the Mirror throws its weight strongly in favour of the change in the law. They have quoted extensively from an open letter I've sent to MPs urging them to support assisted dying when it comes before Parliament. Well, thank you, Noel. I'm popping round to see Noel and Carol at his home tomorrow afternoon, and I'll give you your best wishes and tell him that it went down very well. Okay, now the next is going to be John Pitt talking on why don't they think like me?
I've got 5 minutes, I gather, and I shall do my very best. So, why don't they think like me? This is a question that sort of arises in my mind only too often, and I'd be interested to see how you go along with this. So that's what I'm going to do. Just a little exercise to begin with, and then really what I want to do is to link this whole question into personality types. Some of you may well know quite a lot about personality types. We'll sort of see. So there's two different sort of tests as I shall just outline. I'll tell you how I come out, but probably most important is at the end is why do I think this sort of matters. So thinking differently, a few categories there of issues that we could debate probably all evening. I shall avoid the first one for the obvious reason. You've had too much of that. Avoid religion because that's off record here. Diet, etc., etc. I thought I'd just sound you out on speed limits. Just see if we all agree that speed limits are there to be obeyed. Yes?
Yes.
Yes? No? We do all agree then. Oh, very good. Okay, I thought we might have a bit more of an argument there. Anyway, just to get started on personality types, there's the very familiar sort of categorisation of optimists and pessimists. And I like to start with Arthur Schopenhauer, one of my favourite philosophers, who was a notorious pessimist and would certainly have seen the glass as half empty rather than half full. And by way of a contrast, another well-known philosopher is Leibniz, the mathematician, the man who sort of devised the notation for calculus as well as being a philosopher, and who believed that as an optimist that we all live in the best of all possible worlds. And there's that lovely book, I don't know how many of you have come across Voltaire's Candide, but I really do recommend it. It's only a thin volume and it is absolutely hilarious, but makes a very, very strong point. So optimists and pessimists, making life just a little bit more complicated. We've got someone who sees 4 different types. There's the half full, half empty, the optimist, pessimist. And then you've got the 2 below that, which I don't need to sort of read out. But
I wonder if you could read it out, because I'm afraid my eyesight.
Well, the first one is, top left is the glass is half full, overjoyed. Second one, the miserable bugger, is sort of the glass is half empty. The third one is the indecisive, half full, no, wait, half empty, no, what was the question? And the fourth one is, hey, I ordered a cheeseburger, so slightly missing the point. Now we're going to get on to some slightly more serious ones. So Myers-Briggs, which I said I'd introduce, essentially involves 4 different scales, if you like, and you end up, you do a test of about 40 questions, and you end up being towards one end or towards the other end of 4 different sort of scales, or you can be in the middle, but it's easiest to sort of think. On the first one, you come out essentially as either an extrovert or an introvert. Now, those terms are they're a bit more technically precise than the way in which we normally use them. But anyway, you can be an E or an I. And on the second one, you end up being, so how do you actually get in data? And you're either a sensing person using your senses, or intuition, or intuitive. And then the third category, it comes out, you're either a thinking or a feeling category. And the fourth one is judging or perceiving, so J or P. So you can be any of either of the first two, either of the second two, third and fourth, ends up as being 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 16 different categories. Now, how many people are familiar with Myers-Briggs? A reasonable number, but it looks like most people probably aren't. So if you were to do that test, and you could do it online, you end up with a code. And mine is ISTJ. I'm introvert, sensing, thinking, and judging. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. There's no one thing better than another. And I won't go through the fine print of this, but this is one interpretation of what a typical ISTJ person is. So this is supposedly me, honest and direct, strong-willed and dutiful, very responsible, calm and practical, create and enforce order, and a jack of all trades. And it's not far off at all. I'd like to miss the next slide, which is actually the weaknesses, but I will, in honesty, go through those. Apparently, I could easily be stubborn, true, insensitive, yep, always by the book, yeah, afraid so, rather judgmental, yeah, and often unreasonably blaming myself. So it's a remarkably good fit. I mean, obviously, you don't expect to be spot on, but it's not bad at all. And then we go on to the second test, the Enneagram, which is a much older test, and it's been passed down through the ages from prehistory. It was accredited, I think, to Sufi mystics, but I understand now that actually they just simply took on what was originally there and then developed it. And then much more recently, in the sort of 20th century, and currently, you've got various people sort of writing it down and formalising it, expanding it, and so on and so forth. But what this claims to do, which I think is what Myers-Briggs would sort of claim to do, essentially to give us a deeper insight into who we are and our potential, and how to do something about it. More harmonious and creative daily lives, I'm not so sure about that. I did shorten this. Deeper empathy, compassion, and more creative relationships, etc., etc. So there's all sorts of claims about it. Faster and faster. Right. There is a diagram there, which I certainly don't intend to go through, but just to say it is much more complicated than you might think. This is another way of describing the 9 types that come out. Sorry, I think I omitted to say that there are 9 types, and this particular notation is, I think, quite helpful. The need to be something or other. And I turn out, well, shall I say, I turn out to be a number 1. And if you were to look through that and say, how does that compare to my ISTJ, there's a reasonable degree of overlap. So, and I think, if anything, the Enneagram is slightly better. Right, two more slides, some warnings, 5 minutes, 7 minutes now. You really do need much longer. There are lots and lots of other personality traits, obviously, and it's wrong to think that the one type is better than another. It's just, what are you? Don't jump to conclusions too fast. You do need to actually go through it. And don't attribute a personality type to others. It's ever so tempting to say, oh, my mother-in-law's an 8. Well, I'm sure she is, actually. But strictly speaking, I ought to ask her to do the test. And an important one, you can't change your type, but you can learn to respond and develop the bits that you're not so strong at. And why does it matter? Well, you understand yourself better. You learn, as I said before, how to develop. And perhaps most important of all, you do understand a bit about other people being different. So last slide is what are you?
Okay, so if you overrun, we can have 2 questions. I'll start with the first one, which is, like all questions, a statement with don't you think at the end. A test, to be valid, has to have 2 things. It has to have internal validity, it has to be repeatable and consistent over time and different testers, and I expect these probably are. And it has to be externally valid. It has to relate to something in the real world. Do they predict success, or do they predict people's abilities and to succeed in particular spheres? And I think the answer for Myers-Briggs is no.
I believe Myers-Briggs is used to help people with career planning.
It's used all the time,
right,
but it's not been validated. Does anybody know about Myers-Briggs?
Yes. The
there's the Peters one as well.
Yeah.
They're pretty much a horoscope in my view.
You were saying
I was only going to say that it is so overused, but it has one advantage, that it gets teams together to look at what each team
Yes.
member can contribute.
Oh, that's the Belbin
Beyond
one.
that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't think it is that fantastic.
John, thank you very much
Right.
What comes after 2? Oh, Michael Radford. Come along. Michael Radford is going to talk about 2 sorts of humanism. Just 2.
You'll be so lucky.
And have you got a PowerPoint? No, fine. Off you go. 5 minutes.
As Simon so writes, yes, there are many interpretations of humanism, and I don't think, like the previous talk, I think we probably need 5 months of it rather than 5 minutes to really give him full credit. But I'd like to talk about two kinds. The French humanist philosopher and anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss described 2 types of humanism. The first he referred to as Enlightenment man humanism, and the second, ethnological humanism. Enlightenment man displays the virtues of the Enlightenment, virtues that are often been associated with the male gender, hence Enlightenment man, though I don't think they are any means exclusive to it. These are the virtues of rejecting any kind of understanding that is not based on reason and evidence. And it finds a very clear articulation, perhaps its earliest articulations, in the philosopher David Hume, who in 1748 wrote of any text, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Then commit it to flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. Nobody thought he should apply it to his own work. This view predominated in Western Enlightenment philosophy, producing broadly 2 moral philosophies of a utilitarian and consequentialist nature, and it culminated in Wittgenstein, who completed his earliest philosophical publication in 1922 with the words, "Of that which we cannot speak, we must thereof remain silent." The world, Wittgenstein has told us in this text, consists in verifiable facts of scientific evidence and facts of logic and reason. If our descriptions try to do anything else except than reflect that fact, then we are not talking about anything and should remain silent. Bertrand Russell was a great supporter of Wittgenstein in his early years and approved this message. But philosophy, I would argue, as is the case of any disciplined form of knowledge, has moved on. And Wittgenstein was one of the key figures who moved it on. Produced 2 clear philosophers in his life, 2 philosophical positions. In his later philosophy, that was published around in the 1950s, this is more commensurate with the Lévi-Strauss's ethnological humanism. In this case, humanism displays an interest in any humanly constructed way of understanding the world, whether it is in science, in art, in poetry, or in religion. The question is not whether it makes sense or not, or whether it is true or false, but what does it mean? And what are its implications for human understanding and for human living? It is much less judgmental, much more concerned with negotiation and with respect for difference. Religion is not described in discourses that can be proven by experience or logic. It is not scientific in character, but a much more literary and metaphorical way of describing reality or describing ourselves. It is nuanced and sophisticated repository of human wisdom, which, whether you regard yourself as religious or not, nevertheless can be raided for riches. Wittgenstein's later quote in the later philosophy was, "The meaning of a word lies in the way it is being used." To understand the language of non-scientific ways of seeing the world, we have to understand what people are trying to do when they use that language. How is the language being used? Enlightenment man humanism is on a quest to promote a particular dogma which takes scientific understandings and their emphasis on reason and evidence as its rallying cry. It seeks to create an ideological position that is complementary to a given social activist agenda. Ethnological humanism, on the other hand, is a less militant form, a more non-judgmental, contemplative attitude that is respectful and curious about the different ways in which human beings describe and explain their worlds. Now, my sense is that the British Humanist Association, and I regret this, has got itself locked into what I originally described as, or Levi Strauss described as, the Enlightenment man kind of humanist position. A philosophical perspective that actually ran into the rocks perhaps 70 years ago. Of course, Bertrand Russell was a key figure in the early days of the humanist movement, and nobody can deny the brilliance of his philosophy as a philosopher. But we're now in a new age, a post-Enlightenment age of thinking, where the perspective associated with Enlightenment man is viewed as reductive, simplistic, and restrictive. Thus one might say, in my view, that the proper study for humanists is humanity in all its diverse glory and intelligence. And the proper attitude, I guess, as in relation to any form of study, should be one of humility. Thanks very much.
Exactly 5 minutes, and absolutely fascinating. Okay, so let's have some questions. Can I ask a question? When he said, "Ron man nicht sprechen kann, du musst man schweigen," that's in German. Okay.
No man should, about which you cannot speak, you must therefore remain silent.
I mean, I think that's not unreasonable, because a lot of people say, "Oh, such and such, it's ineffable, it's something, it's indescribable." Well, he said, if you can't describe it, then there's no point talking about it. I fall into a David Hume category, and I'm very much the Enlightenment. But I believe that religion and spirituality and morality can be studied. I believe these are all functions of our mental processes, and it's difficult, but it is studied. We've got a long way to go.
What's the question, Simon? What's the question?
Don't you agree? Richard, you're interested in these things, yeah?
The ethnological humanism that you described seems to me to very likely to lead to moral relativism in the sense that you're going to have to tolerate things like female genital mutilation or patriarchy, because those are aspects of human existence.
I would argue that the consequentialist and utilitarian views of human morality are definitely relativist, because they rest on our view of what the consequences are, whether they're desirable or not, and what creates a sort of utility in terms of human happiness or human welfare. And of course different people have very different views on what human happiness and human welfare is.
I think that's also a stereotype, because I don't believe that most humanists are purely utilitarian or maybe
no.
That may be the case, but when Simon says morality can be studied, I think Simon, in my experience, generally takes that to be a kind of ethnographical study or an anthropological. What is it that works, or what is it that makes people happy or successful or fulfilled? So in a sense, that is the approach that is taken by Enlightenment man.
Okay. I'm going to stop here, because this is a fascinating subject, and I think perhaps something we should enlarge on sometime, and maybe have a little evening discussion about it. I'd very much like to talk more about this. Thank you very much indeed. So, Laurence,
Yes, me.
go for it.
Okay then.
Have you got one of these?
I have. It's up on the just on the right there. That leads into mine quite nicely, actually. I suspect H.G. Wells would probably have had himself down as an Enlightenment man. Now then, so The Island of Doctor Moreau is one of H.G. Wells' early science fiction works of science fiction. It tends, unfortunately, to get a little bit lost between The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds, which is a shame in many ways, really. So my aim is to give a sort of a brief overview without spoiling the plot too much, if anyone's inspired to go away and read it. By the way, are there any Wells scholars in the room, just out of interest? Right, okay, so I have got at least one person who, yeah. Okay then. Now then. So, Dr. Moreau is a vivisectionist whose horrific experiments have forced him to abandon the civilized world and set up shop on an island in the South Pacific. Now, his objective, as befits a vivisectionist, is to explore the extreme limit of plasticity in a living shape. His specific objective is to turn various mammals, from gorillas to pigs and even sloths, into humans. Not only anatomical humans, but creatures that think like humans. He's not entirely clear on his reasons for choosing the human form as his objective, but he does suggest perhaps that it might be for artistic merit. But there's another hint as to what you might be looking at. Now, in the 1890s, the course of human evolution was a bit of a subject of debate, and there was very little evidence to go on. And perhaps I would suggest from this last quote that I've given here, he might be trying to search for some evidence, search for some clues as to what sort of changes might have taken place to turn a gorilla, or something that looked like a gorilla, into a human. Now, Moreau is working on a South Sea island. He has no anaesthetic. He clearly creates a lot of pain, and he deals with the ethics of his experiments by completely ignoring them. Yeah, these are... He clearly subscribes to a sort of ivory tower view of science. What is important to him is knowledge and the quest for it, and any effect that his experiments have on the world around him are completely irrelevant and incidental to him. This utterly shocks and appalls, at least at first, his uninvited guest on the island and the narrator of the story, Edward Prendick, who himself has a background in biology and says that he has studied under Thomas Huxley, as indeed Wells himself did. He seems utterly aghast that that Dr. Moreau treats the animals that he uses as his subjects essentially as being rather like a chess problem, not a fellow creature, as he himself states. Now, once Moreau has finished a beast person and he successfully produces quite a number, he then releases them onto the island, and he drafts a set of rules for them by which to live their life, the law of the beast folk, as it's put by Prendick. On the left is a sample: not to go down on all fours, not to suck up drink, but I quite like the last one. Evidently, Edward Prendick, the narrator, feels that he can't relate to the civilised late Victorian society. Some of the prohibited actions. Now, this law is periodically recited by the beast people, and what fate awaits them should they breach the law is indicated by these lines, which are recited at the end of the law. His is the house of pain, the hand that makes, the hand that wounds, etc. And they prove very prophetic. Now, this is certainly reminiscent of a great number of things, not least, for example, Prospero's treatment of Caliban in The Tempest. But it is also reminiscent of many instances, many events in the Old Testament, and indeed it has been argued that the whole novel, or indeed at least this aspect of it, could be viewed as a critique of the Old Testament. But there's another possibility. Now, the beast people are described throughout the novel as being rather dark-skinned, perhaps slightly brutish, and it would certainly not have escaped a contemporary audience in the 1890s that Moreau's treatment of them, the laws, prescribing laws and that might not have seemed obvious to them, and the harsh punishments would have reflected maybe the way that European colonials treated many of the people they encountered and governed without any real input, democratic input, over the best part of 2.5 centuries. And it is no coincidence, I feel, that Moreau, when relating how he made his first beast person and treated his first beast person, he describes him like this: a fair specimen of the negroid type. Now, it's tempting to view the Dr. Moreau's Island as a sort of outpost of the British Empire, albeit one that the Crown and the British government had no knowledge existed, and indeed the people who hounded him from England because of his experiments would probably be absolutely disgusted by. But I will now conclude. I may have rushed through a little bit, my fear of overrunning, but I would conclude by saying that it's a shame that the novel does tend to get a little bit cast into the shadow, and it, along with the Time Machine and the War of the Worlds, The Worst Men in the Moon, and other early novels, sort of represents a narrative, an encapsulation of science, society, sort of geopolitics at the end of the 19th century. And if you haven't read these books, please do.
That was really good.
Thank you.
So any questions? I must say, the only book I think I've ever read of his was The Time Machine, with the Morlocks and the Eloy. Brilliant. Anybody else read any?
No, I was going to say, what do you think of the film? I don't remember seeing the film, but it was a very long time ago.
There are, I understand, 3 films, and I've heard of a 4th one in the pipeline. I've not actually seen any of them, but I mean, I have read a sort of, effectively an essay by Margaret Atwood about introducing the novel, and she felt, I mean, it was written a number of years ago, so the new film in the pipeline is nothing she does not refer to. But of the 3 existing films, I think one was made in the 30s, one in the 70s, and one's dated 1996. She doesn't rate them very highly, partly because she feels they misrepresent Moreau. In the novel, he is a vivisectionist. He is intent only on the pursuit of knowledge to the exclusion of everything else, and he certainly isn't psychopathic. He certainly isn't a megalomaniac. He certainly has no plans of world domination, which is what his film counterparts seem to be. Hello.
Do you get a sense that, I haven't read it, but do you get a sense that Wells is sympathetic towards Moreau, or is he created the monster? Is he a Frankenstein figure?
It's a bit ambiguous. The narrator, Edward Prendick, is clearly very much opposed to Moreau and is horrified by him, but I think this might be partly down to his days spent at sea following a shipwreck. He almost died and was nursed back to health after being picked up and landing on the island and finding himself on the island. And he's clearly very confused. Moreau is given a great deal of time to explain himself. Certainly, Wells' aim was to shock. With this, with the Time Machine and with the War of the Worlds, he was trying to shake people and he was challenging social conventions. He certainly seemed to have some sympathy with Moreau. I get that feeling, but I don't think he necessarily condones him. I mean, he himself described the book some years later, he was 30 when it was published, as something like a great act of blasphemy, or something along those lines. and it is I think a glorious act of blasphemy is a reasonable summary of it, really.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, Laurence. That's great. Very nice. Just close it down. Yeah. Okay, so Mal, would you like to... Is Mal here? Mal Brown? So Mal's going to talk about the noble art of limerick.
So limerick, I found that most of the humanist meetings I go to tend to be of very academic nature. So I'd like to bring some literature into this meeting. The limerick was popularised by a group of poets from Croom, which is a little town in the county of Limerick in Western Ireland, with a verse form of 2 lines of equal metre ending in a rhyming word, 2 further lines of a shorter metre with different rhyming words, and a final line with the same metre as the first 2 with a rhyming word which is different. Clear? As in, there was a fat lady of Clyde whose shoes once came untied. She didn't dare stoop for fear she would poop, so she cried and she cried and she cried. The Croom poets didn't write in this form until they went on tour. They left Croom, they used to meet in a bar and swap poetry, which wasn't in this rhyming form. So they went on tour across Ireland until they got to Dublin, which is Irish for Blackpool. Not content with going to Dublin and doing their stuff right the way across Ireland, they had a moderate success. But they got the next Stena line conical to Holyhead. But they landed and tried it again, but found it a bit uneasy because they only spoke Irish Gaelic. And people in Holyhead only spoke Gymraeg and Welsh. So that was a bit awkward. But undaunted, they carried on across Anglesey, working of time for the ancestors of the road menders, across the A5, the old A5, until they got to Llanfair PG, which is on this side of Anglesey, on the High Street. And they heard a poem which had a very catchy metre, and a woman who spoke Welsh and Irish Gaelic translated it for them, but this is a rough translation of the English. There was a firm made of Llanfair Pwllwyn go get it in the Robert Classic. They went out one day without a pleating shawl or a liberty bodice with rubber buttons, and got a terrible thirsty, racking cough. Her husband, a gentle spoon carver and clog dancer called Hugh, said, "I love you, Cariad, but that terrible noise you're making is driving me mad, Hugh. So I penned the sheep, kissed the kids, and packed my bag. I'm off." They continued on across Wales with their interpreter. She went along with them, along the old A5 until they came to Shropshire, where they heard this. Across the old farm up in Salop, went off on his horse for a gallop. The horse threw his shoe, he flew in the air flew, and came straight back down with a wallop. The Croom poets had found their form that they wanted to do, and they went back across Wales, over on the Stena line Coracle, over through Ireland and back to Croom. And that's it basically. They then went on to learn 3 languages. They spoke Irish Gaelic, they learned a bit of Welsh, and they had a translator who lived in Llanfair PG, and they learned a bit of English because they just about come into Shropshire. I thought I'd write one myself. I'm getting a bit stuck, so I'm looking for, incidentally, if you'd like to read that, the Penguin Book of Limericks, do get hold. This is the real bit. It's an interesting bit, it's fascinating. But I won't let the cruise ones in there, that's over. So I've written one myself, and I brought the Croom thumb harp, because I will play it when I can't find the word that I need. A girl understandably shy had, that was somewhat awry. One hung in repose while the second one rose, and a third looked her straight in the... Any ideas? If I go through it again, if you can think of something. A girl understandably shy had... Teeth?
Teeth.
Ears?
Eyes.
Eyes. The problem with one of her eyes.
Right, could have this inside eye. A girl understandably shy had, that was somewhat awry. One hung in repose while a second one rose, and a third looked her straight in the... Oh, come on! The noble loss of the limerick.
There was a young lady from Crewe who stopped all her limericks at line 2. There was a man from Verdun. Okay. Any questions about limericks? Thank you very much. That was great. As always, Mal, you're a treat. Elke. Okay, come along. Elke's going to talk about
Hugging and touching. So, when I first heard about this opportunity to talk for 5 minutes, I was massively excited because I thought I've not had the opportunity to challenge myself and talk only for 5 minutes, and also because I could choose my subject, which is also a new experience for me. So I then thought, in panic, what should I choose? Should I talk about, I don't know, my work? Choices are more difficult than I thought they would be. My business, my recent PhD, being German. I thought that might be interesting. And then I thought living in 3 different countries is also quite interesting. However, the difficulties living in different countries is, of course, the humour. It took me 6 years to understand British humour, and the only person who helped me was John Cleese. So I'm optimistic, always optimistic. Then I thought, talk about something that brings us together, that brings our emotions and our feelings together. And what else would there be than touch and hugs? Now, I've been very fortunate. I grew up with lots of hugs and lots of physical contact. That's why I believe that whatever happens in life, I always end up an optimist. Because it is a powerful thing to grow up with. Of course, I'm aware that not everyone is that fortunate. And I also think that it needs to be said. I obviously am aware that we're talking here about appropriate touching and appropriate closeness to others, of which handshake is one. And I'm not talking about the polite thing you do in Germany where everybody shakes hands and some so strong that my hand falls off. I talk about touching another hand which is warm and gives you a feeling of warmth. A tap on the shoulder means, hey, I know you. I like you. Well done. Blowing a kiss goes a bit further, of course, and has nothing to do with the touching and the hug. But I put it there because it is an example of nonverbal communication, which shows one of the stronger methods of showing somebody that we like them. A gentle touch, a look, and of course, a hug. And I'm here not to ask you to hug each other. I was tempted to do that, but I thought half of you would leave. I also think it's a bit culty to do that. But a hug has very powerful messages, very powerful messages. And I'm here to basically say, go forth and hug, because the benefits outweigh the difficulties getting there. So why talk about touching and hugging? Why should we receive and give hugs? And I'm aware that, of course, that not everyone can hug or touch or even be hugged or touched. But on the whole, when we are hugged particularly, it makes us feel good. It relieves stress. And in many ways, and this has been shown in all the studies about this area, is that it helps us to stay healthy, has a positive effect on our immune system. A hug boosts your I always say oxytocin. I don't know why I do this. My excuse is second language bit. But oxytocin, it boosts it, and it helps you to heal these feelings of loneliness, being on your own, and feeling separated. When you hold a hug longer, it lifts your serotonin levels, and that leads you to feel better, to be happier. It helps you in that process physically. Now, studies have shown that there is a direct relationship between physical closeness, touch or hug, and the level of self-esteem, which can go up if you have the fortunate experience of being hugged or touched. So, as I said, I initially thought I'll get you all to touch and hug, but I think it's a tall order to ask anybody you don't know. But I have to say that on Tuesday, when Simon gave his presentation in my area of work, I had no idea, it's the first time I listened to him, and he was talking about empathy. And there is a direct relationship with all of these, the optimism, the positivity, and empathy, which now is very much a question of compassion. And these are all connected things that start with the physical touch. So I finish, I hope within time, because I've practiced this a lot. If you don't feel like a hug, and many people don't, as I said, it's worth learning it because the benefits are enormous. I'm talking about, of course, those people who don't hug. A touch can carry just as strong a message as a hug. And the safe zone, or in my experience in my work, the safe zone is from here to here. You touch a person here, it's neither offensive nor intrusive, and that is a very great bit to start on your body. Okay, obviously in a safe and non-threatening way, and I thank you very much for listening, and go forth and hug.
Steve, who sent me a TED talk.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you remember who it was by?
Yeah, I've got a question. It was a guy called Zach Paul, or Paul Zach.
That's right.
It's a TED talk. It's very good. It's about morality and the role of oxytocin. He tests. On Tuesday, I was talking at the meeting, in one of the gaps, about oxytocin, and they were saying, yes, it's what enables mothers to give birth. It's a hormone, isn't it?
Yes.
When you have and it's also called the hugging hormone, because you can boost your oxytocin by hugging. So, Simon might answer this, but you...
It also makes you
Elke.
trust. It increases trust.
Yeah.
Magnificent. You can show this with experiments. It makes people more generous.
Right.
In fact, you can squirt oxytocin into people's faces, and they'll inhale it,
That's
and they
right.
become more trusting.
Yeah, but the question is, it's a hormone. If you have a hug, how long does the hormone last? I mean, I'm not planning to give birth in the next 5 minutes.
Well, I don't think if I
Is it
just
a long-term
go,
thing?
oh, Simon.
That was not enough. Bit more.
That's it. No, it has to be.
Yeah, it has to be meaningful.
It has to be meaningful.
Yeah.
It has to be genuine. It has to be like
The hormones do last a long time, don't they?
Yes,
Yes.
but
Yes,
it
they
has
kick
to
in.
be repeatedly. A one-off doesn't do it. It's like therapy. You have to go there more.
Okay, sorry. Mal, you had a question first.
Elke, if you're keen on humour, can you give us some points to that last monologue?
Did you say humour?
Yes.
God, I take that as a compliment. Honestly,
Yeah, Geoff.
I will.
Actually, mine isn't a question. I just wanted to say, as somebody who worked with touch for 30 years, who have put it so beautifully and so perfectly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. So, six, seven. Geoff, come along. Geoff Hardy, a new member today, or a new attendee. And before he talks, he's just given me. Geoff is one of the organisers of the local LGBT team. Humanists are very keen on supporting LGBT rights, and if they have events like Gay Pride, we'd like to have a presence there. And he's left some booklets here about some of the things that are happening over the next few. Do you want to just say a word about that?
Next month is LGBT History Month, which started in 2004 by a friend of mine called Patrick and another friend called Sue Sanders. It works very, very closely over those years with schools. And what we have done this for the last few years, 4 of us, is organise a series of events that go right across the whole spectrum, from plays to films to talks, to cover subject like people seeking asylum, being a refugee. We have Dean Atter, who's a performance poet who Benjamin Zephaniah raves about, and I would too if you read his work. I Am Nobody's Nigger is one of his superb poems as a young black man, hearing that word again. And I know that feeling because that happened to me with the word queer. So I'm going to stop there on that. I found out, I got the invite this morning of Simon. And the reason I think is because the other night, those of you who were at the debate, there was a point where Peter was winding up, and he just happened to, in that, was illustrating the goodness of Christian people, I think. And he mentioned William Wilberforce and said, the man who stopped slavery in Britain. And I'm sorry, I just said, no! And it just happened that way, I didn't even think about it consciously. And he carried on, and I said, no, he didn't. And when Simon got in contact with me this morning and said, it actually would be not a bad idea if you could explain why you feel that way, or what kind of thoughts are going on for you. Well, and obviously, one of the things as a gay man I know is that you understand people's lives if you just attempt to stand in their shoes and read how they view the world. You do not understand it. You know you can't, but at least you attempt. And one of the books I read recently is by a rapper called Akala, who used to have the name Kingsley. He changed his name as a rapper to Akala, and it's called Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire, and I can't recommend it too highly. And he was born in 1983, Akala, and at 7 years old he was on a school trip to the National Portrait Gallery, and his teacher, who didn't like him very much, and he was a bit troublesome, pulled him out and said, Kingsley, you'll like this, and she pointed to a portrait of William Wilberforce and said, this man stopped slavery, expecting him to be terribly, oh God, I'm so grateful to you, let me bow to you. No, what he actually said was, what? All by himself, miss? Don't you mean he helped? No, Kingsley, he stopped slavery. Well, Akala had been to Pan-African classes already, and he had been taught about slave rebellions by Jamaican Maroons, and he'd heard about the Haitian Revolution and Toussaint Louverture. So he knew that slaves had not, in his own words, just sat about waiting for Wilberforce to free them. Like most struggles, it was the people themselves who created the grounds for the struggle to achieve itself, and other people supported them. But for 2 centuries, Britain had profited from hugely successful human trafficking. And then Wilberforce, one parliamentarian, stopped it all by himself. Wow, that's pretty something, isn't it? So in 2007, 200 years after Britain's abolition of slavery, he was on the stamps. Wilberforce did it. And the emblem of the time was a white man leading out to sort of help his poor black brother. And there was a film on Wilberforce called Amazing Grace. There were also a few little TV programmes made by black people themselves who tried to put the record straight. There was absolutely no apology whatsoever for slavery from the British, or any mention of compensation to those who they enslaved. And of course, one of the other myths is that, and I grew up with this, I don't know how many of you did, we were the first country to abolish it. No, actually Denmark in 1792 abolished slavery. And why did we abolish it? Well, we like the myth, don't we? We love it. We suddenly realised how dreadful it was. We suddenly realised how we debased these people. We thought, oh God, we've got to stop it. Well, I'm going to say, no, that's not true. I'm a bit of a cynic on that. I don't think we did it for that reason at all. Because if we had, why did we compensate the owners for the loss of their property to the tune, in those days, of £20 million? That much of our wealth, stately homes, and successful industry comes from it. So was it pangs of conscience and nothing more? Or, just possibly, was it a fear of revolution? There had been a very successful revolution by the slaves in Haiti. There had been the French Revolution. There had been the American Revolution. One of the fears might have been, just possibly, that if they had a revolution and succeeded, our businesses over there would no longer be our businesses, and the economy would collapse over here for those few people who made a lot of money out of it, because I know a lot of other people were in fact enslaved here. And also, of course, we gave France, when they tried to defeat this rebellion, very vicious put down of it. They really tried hard. They went to tremendous extent, and we supported them. We gave them weapons. We stopped the embargo, because previously we had tried to take Haiti from the French because it was actually one of the most profitable slave owning plantations. So we wanted it, we didn't get it, we lost. And then we lift the embargo that we've now got for France because actually, no. So it doesn't look as though we were terribly sorry for it. If the owners were compensated, what of the slaves? Absolutely nothing. So what did happen to them? Well, they were offered 5-year apprenticeships on the same plantations, and if they didn't cooperate, they were thrown off their land, which they thought was theirs, because they heard that Britain had freed them. So they decided, oh right, if we're free then we're going to negotiate. And what happens to workers when they start to say to powerful people, we want to negotiate here? And that's exactly what happened to them. So that sounds to me a very familiar story. So after abolition, what did Britain actually do? Well, we carried on with slavery in Aden, Sierra Leone and Hong Kong for another 100 years plus. We invested in slave-owning traders and businesses and imported their goods. Now, having said all that, I would say the abolition of slavery was a huge step forward, despite this. But did Wilberforce act alone? No, of course not. Foxwell, Paxton, Clarkson, and what happened to them and their comrades who helped the fight against slavery? They got imprisoned, they got arrested, they got beaten up, they got ridiculed, they lost their jobs. So that's what happened to the other people. There were also some black British abolitionists. We never hear about them. They didn't appear on the stamps. Mary Prince Ottobah Quagano and Aluda Equiano. Why are they so unknown? So in my view, it's time to dispel these myths and the idea that Britain abolished slavery out of a moral conscience and all was better afterwards.
I think it's interesting that Winston Churchill said that the history of England, or the history of Britain, was a history of great men. Not great women, great men. And there's been a kind of cult in history teaching of picking an individual and making him a celebrity, and her as well. And it does, as you say, it oversimplifies and it reduces a very complex and very intimate. You might also mention the fact that we were actually fully supporting the southern states during the slave owners because we were buying cheap.
I was worried about time.
We were buying their cheap cotton. So we were taking advantage of the slave economy.
And in one factory, the workers realised that the cotton was coming from slave industries and they refused to touch it. They went on strike. They also did not have a comfortable time. So our relationship is not a good one, to say the least. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Nigel Matthews is going to talk about the power of words.
And the importance of words. That's correct.
Of words. Okay.
Thanks, Simon. Good evening. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I apologise for the floor. So I'll try and make the movement from the top half of the body rather than the feet. I take it as an elemental truth of life that words matter. The word tolerance, for example, is widely used to reflect a world within which we wish to live. Tolerance is not welcome, however. It allows, it endures, it indulges. Tolerance was and is a baby step to make pluralism possible. And pluralism, like every ism, holds an illusion of control. It doesn't ask us to care for a stranger. It doesn't even ask us to invite us to know each other, to be curious, to be open, to be moved or surprised by each other. Here are some words that I love. Words that describe presence and a means towards an end. I want you at this point to bear with me and close your eyes and savour the following words. And place the picture that you want to around them. Edifying, redemptive, courageous, generous, winsome, adventurous, curious, and tender. Thank you. Peace, strange word, strangely divisive. Justice, somehow partisan. I'm unmoved when we celebrate diversity by putting it up on a pedestal and avoiding its messiness and its depth. Of course, all words are just containers on some level, but that's not really the point. The connection between words and meanings resembles the symbiosis between religion and spirituality. Words are crafted by human beings. They take on all our flaws and all our frailties. They diminish or embolden the truths they arose to carry. We drop and break them sometimes. We renew them again and again. Brian Stevenson, Harvard graduate, African American, an advocate of the oppressed in America. He came from Alabama, fought his way through, and in his TED talk, which I advise you to take a look at, and some of the speeches, etc., that he's given, I was fortunate enough to be in Ann Arbor when he received the Ralph Wallenberg Medal, and he challenges on 4 parts. I won't go into the 4, but the second one is to change the narrative that we're experiencing in the world today. And we're all culpable in not using the correct narratives on a whole variety of subjects. We are starved and ready for fresh language to approach each other. Words matter. Do the best you can. Thank you.
That was extraordinary. It was poetry, and you must send me have a copy of that. It will be on the website. That was really good. Thank you. Yeah, the importance of narrative in our lives. There's a whole branch of psychology called psychonarrative. We see each other as part of ourselves as a story. Any questions about... What was the name of that TED talk?
Brian Stevenson, and he wrote the most wonderful book called Just Mercy. And it's his experience as he tried to advocate for people in death row, sent there under spurious reasons, and also for the number of primarily African American children who are incarcerated in America on the 3-strike rule. Nothing major, but they are sent to prison for life, these children. It is a scandal in America, the situation at the moment, and he's this Jesus-like figure, for better or worse, who's trying his best to see if something can be done about it. I just wish he would run for president. That's another subject.
Thank you very much indeed. Really, really inspiring. Now, Nick Marshall. Always provocative.
That's provocative.
Well, remember we talked last time about humanism, the natural friend of anarchy.
Anarchism.
Anarchism, sorry.
I like anarchism. A question to ponder. How many people do you know by name? Don't worry, I'll answer this question for you in about 5 minutes. Humans reproduce at longer intervals than most creatures. So, human physical evolution proceeds slowly. It takes about 10,000 years for significant physical adaptation to occur in humans. This means that we have brains made not for the world we live in, but the world as it was thousands of years ago. A world with fewer than 15 million people in it. A world in which agriculture is just beginning to replace hunting and gathering. A Bronze Age world. One with no big cities, no mass transport, no newspapers or television or internet. Oh, my poor brain. How do we live in a world so unlike the one for which our brains are designed? We as individuals have, and society as a whole has, coping mechanisms. Some of them generally benign, things like sophisticated culture and art. Some rather more ambivalent, things like custom
ritual, religion. Some decidedly not benign, things like land ownership, social hierarchy, imposed laws, and the physical enforcement which accompanies those things. I think that we could do better. I would like to introduce a most important number. Unlike us, other primate species still live in the environments for which they evolved. Observation of these species in the wild tells us that they live in smallish groups. The size of monkey social groups depends upon the size of monkey brains. Group size is determined by the capacity of those brains for forming, remembering, and managing social relationships. By comparing monkey brains with ours, the anthropologist Robin Dunbar has predicted how many people a human brain can maintain a social relationship with. And Dunbar's number is 147.8. Okay, let's say about 150. To put it another way, there are about 150 people you would say hello to if you met them in the street. This includes those people you would also hug. I'd already written that down. And at the other end of the spectrum, it also includes those people you may not have seen for a while, but with whom you would like to renew your acquaintance. And if you're unlucky, it probably includes a few people you'd rather it didn't. Human society works with fewer problems when each individual understands his or her relationship with each other person and knows about the relationships between the people around him. It is easier to empathize with others when we live in a group which is not bigger than our brains can manage. Some examples.
Hang on. What's going on with it?
Is it working? Have I lost my slides? Oh, whoa.
Would you all pray? Yeah, it worked. Might as well go home.
Have you seen all of the other slides?
Yes, we did.
Oh, good. Right. In that case, Dunbar's number in action. Some examples of Dunbar's number. The basic unit size of the Roman army was, and of most modern armies is, 150 soldiers. These people are in very difficult and stressful situations. 150 is a good number. The Hutterites, fascinating, these people, an interesting and much persecuted religious group who emigrated en masse to America and Canada in the late 19th century. They live in colonies, each of which has between 60 and 250 people. When a colony grows and its population approaches the upper limit, the colony purchases land for and builds a daughter colony, and then it divides in two. W.L. Gore, the people who make Gore-Tex. That company has about 9,500 employees. They're divided into workplaces, each of which is no bigger than 150 people. This policy was arrived at by trial and error, with the objective of keeping the workforce happy and thus maximising productivity. Now, none of these people knew about Dunbar's number because it wasn't worked out until 1992, after they had decided how best to organise themselves. Anyway, you remember that question I asked? The answer, I would suggest, is about 150. Thank you for listening.
That's absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. How many in our group have we got?
Let us point out that there are about 75 in humanists, so if we all find another person then we're there.
But it does mean if you grow too much, you'll have to split into two groups.
You take the other one, John.
Okay. Any questions?
John?
Yeah, just a fairly obvious one about the impact of social media, which seems to be forcing everybody to have vast contingents of...
well, people like to have, at least 500 friends on Facebook, don't they? But how real are these relationships? What do they count for? Their brains can't accommodate that many relationships of any significance. So it seems to me that social media very overrated if they lead to
And you can't
groups
hug.
that big.
Although maybe they can organise some sort of farms to come out and
Automated hugging.
Nick, are you happy with your 15?
Ha ha ha. I am very happy that I'm retired because all the ones who are in my 150 that I would rather have not had there, I've been able to push out now.
So when you've got 150 friends and people say, can I be your friend? I say, no. There's a waiting list. When I go off somebody, I'll let you know, but otherwise I'm sorry. That's how it works.
No, it doesn't work quite like that.
Well, thank you very much for listening. Now, Babs, you can come and chat to us.
I'll start by saying thanks, Simon. I'm probably the most terrified person here doing this.
Don't be silly, you'll be great. Did you have one of these?
Yeah,
Which
it's
one?
just one with Charlotte and the
That one?
Yes, but not yet. That comes at the end. It's just a very short video.
Okay.
So I'll ask you to click it on there. Right.
Take it.
I decided when Simon said we could do with some people to talk about, anything to do with the human condition, and something that's been on my mind quite a lot over the last 4 years is Tourette's syndrome. And I wonder what immediately springs to your mind when someone mentions Tourette's. Yeah, exactly. Somebody's laughing. Yes, that's what I mean. This is why I'm doing it. You might have heard jokes about people with Tourette's or just assume it's someone who swears inappropriately. And in over 40 years of special needs teaching, I wasn't aware I'd come across it. ADHD, ASD, OCD were all prevalent as I was teaching. And now, of course, I know that indeed these disorders can often overlap with Tourette's syndrome. The name, apparently, I had to look this up, comes from a French doctor who was first to diagnose the syndrome. His name was Georges de la Tourette, who described this condition to an 85-year-old French noblewoman as long ago as 1885. It's a neurological disorder characterised by repetitive, stereotyped involuntary movements and vocalisations called tics. It came to public prominence through the media when in 2006 Big Brother, remember that lovely programme, the TV reality show signed up Pete Bennett, a Tourette's sufferer, as an inmate for the house. The Tourette's Syndrome Association were concerned that others with the condition would be mocked. However, they softened their stance when they realised it had helped publicise the condition and inspire fellow sufferers. Pete went on to win the series with a vote of 61%. However, mimicry did occur, as I remember well the comedians in my bottom set Year 9 English class shouting out obscenities, followed by, "Can't help it, miss, I've got Tourette's." In fact, only 10 to 15% of people with TS have the condition of coprolalia, involuntary swearing. I could give an entire evening talking about the research, or lack of it, for Tourette's, the symptoms, the causes, the diagnoses, the treatment and the prognoses, but I want to talk more personally. My 20-year-old great niece Charlotte, intelligent, a gifted musician, destined for straight A stars in GCSEs, went to bed 2 weeks after her 16th birthday and woke up the next day with full-blown Tourette's. Absolutely terrifying. Her mother and grandmother were nurses, well, my sister being the grandmother. Her grandfather was a retired GP, and all were at a loss on what to do, as were most of the medical profession that they consulted. My niece and Charlotte reached out on the internet to fellow sufferers and are now greatly involved with local and national groups of Tourette's Action. In fact, they call them the Tourette's family. Charlotte's two younger sisters have obviously had their lives totally disrupted by Charlotte's behaviour, but have coped magnificently with the traumas of being hit, called names, and witnessing the dangerous and sometimes hilarious tics that have afflicted Charlotte. The family's sense of humour has been paramount, and their ability to laugh with Charlotte and not at her has helped considerably. Instead of my words trying to explain what Charlotte's life is like, I'll read to you a short blog which she wrote for the Tourette's Action Group about a year ago, revealing how her tenacity in finding help for herself has made such an enormous difference to her life. This was written in February 2018 when she was 19. On the 28th of October 2014, just 2 weeks after I turned 16, I had a sudden onset of severe motor and vocal tics. Although I've had small tics from a young age, I think we all know little kids who are a bit twitchy and blinky, and I think there's a lot more people who have a very minor form of Tourette's than we realise. But obviously there was nothing that had triggered my tics to become so severe so suddenly. They were dangerous and impulsive. I was hurting myself and getting into dangerous situations. I'd hit myself, try and hurt myself with sharp objects or touch hot things, throw myself backwards or down the stairs, running tics that would cause me to bolt or run out into the oncoming traffic, and have tic fits that would leave me on the floor, unable to communicate sometimes for hours at a time. I once mentioned those to you, Simon, and I think you said, "Are you sure it's Tourette's?" I can assure you it is. I completely lost my confidence and independence, and I had to have an adult with me all the time to keep me safe. Again, I don't want to overrun. This goes on a little bit. She goes on about the medication that they put her on, because that was the only thing the medics could offer, which was something you might know, clonidine, which is more for ADHD, anxiety disorders and tic disorders. But all she says is that zombified her, and she hardly remembers her last year at high school when she was taking her GCSEs, and she had to significantly reduce the number of GCSEs because of her concentration problems and the actual fits themselves and the ticking. Her one saving grace was, if I go on to this now, I knew I couldn't live the life I was, tired, unable to concentrate, and not being able to practice my music. Music was my only outlet. When I'm studying music, either playing, composing, or just listening, my tics disappear, and I've witnessed this. It is just amazing. I practiced my instruments for hours and hours every day to get a break from the constant ticking, but the clonidine made it difficult. So, when you think at this age, she was only 16, 17, she researched, she goes on to tell us how she researched online, she reached out to people in America and heard about, as the Americans call them, service dogs, we call them assistance dogs, had helped some Tourette's sufferers with their tics. So she then went on and got in touch with the AD UK, Assistance Dogs UK, and asked, reached out to them for help, and they say, we can't help you, we can't train dogs to assist people with Tourette's. But she was determined to find a way, and she again researched and found a company in Ireland who said they could do it, cost her $6,500, but we'll do it. And the idea was, we'll bring you the puppy, you bond with it, then we take it away again and train it. Turned out, and whether you saw the programmes on TV, they were part of this puppy farming scam in Ireland, and she got the dog, Lexi. They paid about $2,000 up front to get her first of all. And again, just reading from a blog, I hadn't had Lexi for very long, but my family and I had already started to notice the difference Lexi was making to all of our lives. Being with Lexi completely stopped my impulsive tics, meaning I could walk down the road without the fear of stepping out in front of a car. I've been having tic fits every day. They're the ones where she just thrashes on the floor, can't control her movements. But again, they lessened because of she was concentrating on Lexi and getting Lexi to do the things she wanted. She came off the drugs, and finally things looked more positive. But as I say, the company closed down. There was no possibility of the dog going back to be trained. So again, she researched and she found that by law you can train your own assistance dog, and it can be called an assistance dog if she has a little coat when she's working. And of course the money that she hadn't passed on to this rogue firm, she used to go to a very good dog trainer. It took 3 years. And now Lexi's given her back her independence. She keeps her safe. She helps her cross the road safely. She creates a barrier between myself and the road so that I won't step into the road. She picks things up that when I'm getting undressed, when my tics make it difficult. She helps me go downstairs and interrupts tics that cause me to hit myself. I've seen her beating her chest with her fists with these tics, totally uncontrollable. And now the dog is so tuned into her tics that if she's going to have a major fit, she can sense it 10 minutes before it happens, and get her to somewhere safe or go and get help. If she can't find her, she'll bark for help, to get somebody there. And as Charlotte puts here, it's just a pity that she can't cook or make a cup of tea for me, as those things I still can't do due to my impulsive tics. She cannot make a cup of tea, 20-year-old girl. She'll put her hand in the boiling water. She can't have knives, kitchen knives. She has to have plastic. But as she says here, to summarise, Lexi gives me all the confidence to go out in public. She goes on the trains, the buses. She attended college with her. And finally now, Charlotte has just completed her first term at Salford University. A bit slower than, she's 20 now and it's only her first term, because the sixth form she went to were totally unhelpful and didn't understand her. And she got to LIPA, Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, if you remember it, in Liverpool. It was founded by Paul McCartney, and she had a marvellous year there and very successfully she's now studying music at Salford. And I just wanted to finish, she's now, as well as doing written blogs, she started, if ever you want to see it, Charlotte Graham, she's now trying to do a blog every week to help other Tourette's sufferers and to help them. Should we just
recommended settings?
Recommended settings?
Yes. There she is. Get the sound. There's her tics now. This is like this all the time.
I've been putting off making this video for quite some time now. Even today, I've been sat in front of the camera for about 3 hours now, trying to decide what to say. So I moved to Salford just over a month ago now. I'm studying music at Salford University. And I felt this is the right time to start making these videos now. I was diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome when I was 16. I had a sudden onset in October 2014. It was just 2 weeks after I turned 16. Since then I've been diagnosed with other comorbid conditions, common ones, ADHD and OCD, which come along with Tourette's. So I initially wanted to make a documentary about life with Tourette's and include some of the things that are often missed in mainstream media, to avoid the stereotype. Our documentaries, they require a lot of planning, they're very time consuming, and you can't fit all the content in that you often want to include. However, instead of making an hour-long documentary, I've decided to instead start this vlog. Making YouTube videos, drive marijuana.
She says marijuana a lot, just impossible.
This channel will feature Tourette's in real life. However, it the main focus of it won't be all about Tourette's. I will make videos on the condition, how it affects me, how I deal with it. So I'm a musician, I'll be posting videos of me performing, I'll make videos about university and life as a student, any adventures I go on. I want to show people that Tourette's doesn't stop me, and it won't stop me from doing the things I want to do in life, and I want to show other people with Tourette's that it is possible to live a relatively normal life, as normal as you can with Tourette's. But Tourette's. There are ways to manage Tourette's, not just going down the medication route, so I'll be talking a lot about Lexi.
There's Lexi on the bed. It's gorgeous.
Talking about real life stuff. I just happen to have Tourette's. So I'll try and upload videos as often as I can. I'll aim for once a week, but hopefully people will be interested in watching the things I post. Hopefully as time goes on I will get better at making these videos and getting the lighting and the camera angle right. So thanks for watching this first video. See you soon.
My lovely
Any questions?
They're stunned.
Is she not on any medication?
No. She's, if you like, self-helped by the dog and everything. She, it's just amazing. She's living in a student digs.
Yeah.
She has got support. They've got, she's with 3 other people with various conditions. So there is somebody, but the dog goes everywhere with her. You should see it. She plays the French horn. She plays the piano. She's a gifted composer. If you go on, if you just put Charlotte Graham into YouTube and Tourette's, you'll see her with all her different instruments, playing them and everything. And she's just amazing, and I just think she's so brave.
Okay, so this is the last one. I did the first, I'll do the last. Now, I want you to take this seriously. This is something quite personal to me. Now, okay, so I'm going to talk about a particular religion, and I noticed that I have a colleague here. Would you stand up for a moment? Arr. How do we greet each other? Arr, arr, okay. So this is the Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. I have a copy of it here, and also a book of tales of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. And this is one of the few Gospels that actually has a disclaimer in it. Let me just get my glasses. Now, the disclaimer in this book is as follows. People who, by the way, members of the Flying Spaghetti Monster called Pastafarians. While Pastafarianism is the only religion based on empirical evidence, it should also be noted that this is a faith-based book. Attentive readers will notice numerous holes and contradictions throughout the text. They will even find blatant lies and exaggerations. These have been placed here to test the reader's faith. Okay. There's also another disclaimer, and I should just... This is getting a bit stuff there. Okay. I should explain that the Flying Spaghetti Monster is totally fearless, except he does not like small people, midgets and dwarfs. And there's a disclaimer about midgets. Our religion does not wish to discriminate or cause hurt feelings among any group, and this is especially true of the very short, who, if provoked, could easily appear out of nowhere and attack. As a solution, we offer the following. To prevent angering the little people community, we suggest that this book be placed on a very high shelf. Okay, so this is going to be a really fast go through. If you want to know more about it, there is a British chapter of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. You must obey your noodly master. Now, a little bit of history. The universe was created in just a fraction of a second, 5,000 years ago, by the flying spaghetti monster. Now, as you know, young Earth creationists say that it was 6,000. 6,000! It's ridiculous. It was 5,000 years ago. And then he spent the next 100 years burying evidence of a longer universe. And he buried this evidence like dinosaur bones and things like that, or photons coming from distant stars. He created all this, okay, in such a way that even modern day scientists cannot detect what he did, which proves how well he did it. So nothing much happened until about 2,500 years ago, when his noodly appendages informed the population that they should become pirates. So they gave away their farms and their houses, and they built boats, and they put on pirate regalia, and they travelled the world. And they were good pirates. They were nice, giving sweets to children. Good pirates. And they fought for love and peace around the world, together with beer and spreading venereal disease. Now, that all went quite well until 1,700 years ago, when there was a war. Now, basically, I mean, it was an appalling thing. They trusted everybody apart from small people. And then it was Halloween, and these Hare Krishna people came along in canoes towards their pirate boats. And they, of course, thought they were trick-or-treat people for Halloween. So they started giving them chocolates and sweets. And the Hare Krishnas started killing them with their double-bladed kayak oars, paddles. And the population of the pirates throughout the world was absolutely decimated. I mean, this is appalling. We don't have much history because so many boats went down at that time. I mean, it was terrible. Okay. Now, you're saying it's all a bit hearsay. I have evidence. Firstly, you know about this from the other night, axiomatic truth. Well, there's good axiomatic truth. I'll come to that in a moment. Discovered proof and revealed proof. So, axiomatic. This is the ontological argument. The flying spaghetti monster is a being which has every perfection. Existence is a perfection, therefore the flying spaghetti monster exists. Okay, not just toast, but fried bread. You want more evidence than that? Okay, if the flying spaghetti monster didn't exist, why is DNA shaped like pasta? Okay. And okay, you can make these fun little shapes with your hands. That tells you something. And what about this? If the flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist, why are the planets perfectly shaped like meatballs? Okay. And then this is discovered truth. Paintings and caves. Here are more of them. Here is a little statue. It's been enlarged, you can see it, built of the flying spaghetti monster. If you look at art and scrape away some of the paintings that are on top, you'll reveal the flying spaghetti monster. Even the Last Supper. It was not bread and wine, it was pasta and beer. Okay. There's an example of royal pastafarians. Okay, so here are pastafarians going around their daily life. They wear cullenders on the head, it's traditional this. There's the first Pastafarian church. There's a clergyman down there under the arch. And there at the top is somebody being initiated into Pastafarianism, and actually he's being made a minister, and this is his certificate of ordination. Children are encouraged to wear cullenders at an early age and to pray before they eat their pasta, and at a certain age they go through a baptism service. Okay. And of course later on they get married. Now this is a traditional wedding. This takes in Australia. This is a legal wedding, because Pastafarianism is recognised as a legal church there. And a part of the service, they have a noodle or a spaghetti piece, which they both suck on until their lips meet. It's a very, very emotional and tender part of the service. And you may remember this from Lady and the Tramp. And Walt Disney was a Pastafarian. This is not all appreciated by everybody. Okay. Now, in America, it is officially recognised as a religion, and therefore you can have a calendar on your head when you're having your passport photograph taken. Now that is a step in the right direction, but it does not go far enough. This is what we want people to have their photographs taken with an eye patch and pasta hair, but that hasn't been allowed yet, but we're working on it. Okay, so what are their commandments? There are 8 commandments, and they all start with, I really rather you didn't. So here they are. So let's just look at a few. I'd really rather you didn't challenge the bigoted, misogynist, hateful ideas of others on an empty stomach. Eat, then go after the bullshit. Down here, I'd really rather you didn't do unto others as you would have them do unto you if you're into stuff that uses leather and lubrication. This is the first one. I'd really rather you didn't act like a sanctimonious, holier-than-thou ass when describing my noodly goodness. Now, 8 commandments. What would be better than 8 commandments?
9.
Almost. 10. So, every now and again people come up with new commandments. These all start with are there, except it's are there. Okay, so here are the 8. Let's just look at a few of these. Down here, commandment 9, are there. Don't threaten any of my creations with hell. It doesn't exist, except for those who break commandment 6. Absolute bastards. Oh, so commandment 6, are there. Penne should never be cooked beyond al dente, ever. I can't believe I even need to tell people that. This is a nice one. Commandment 1, are there. If you want to discriminate against LGBT people, then you'll have to explain your homophobia yourself. Don't try and blame me. I didn't create you to discriminate against anyone. This is a bit of merchandising, all is noodle, daily noodle, our Lord and Pastor. And here again, some Carbo DM. The fool hath said in their stomach that there is no more room for spaghetti. There are books of sayings. This is Basilos, that was 114. I have found the truth, and it is made of pasta. I have that T-shirt, but I can't find it. I was going to wear it. My son's nicked it, I think. It's in the wash. Oh, yes. So, Church of the Flying, well, so they're very keen on pirates and spaghetti and beer, and it's noteworthy that they claim 99% less guilt than any other religion. And beer is a very important part. They believe that heaven consists of stripper factories and beer volcanoes. Yeah. Now, 5,000 years ago, the earth was created, and later pirates ruled the earth. This is what's called intelligent design with balls. And, okay, so basically, if somebody says they believe in God, you can say, I can prove that your God doesn't exist. And you say to them, prove that the flying spaghetti monster doesn't, and I will use your method. So if somebody says, I'm a Christian, you say, okay, I will prove that your Christian God doesn't exist. Do you believe in the flying spaghetti monster? And they say, no. And you say, prove it, and then use the same proof on there. Because there is more evidence, I presented more evidence for the flying spaghetti monster than the other one. Okay. Now, some people are concerned that the flying spaghetti monster, the church, mocks Christianity. And that's a serious consideration, because we don't want to hurt people. But actually, the answer is no, it really doesn't. And the reason is that Pastafarianism came first. Pastafarianism was there before Jesus. And in fact, Christianity has adopted many of our features. They mock us. Let's do some examples. Okay. The word amen. Amen is derived from ar-men, and that's amen, ramen, which is of course Japanese noodles. So when the end of a prayer, okay, Pastafarians say ramen or armen. Okay. The flying spaghetti monster prayer was copied by Jesus. Our pastor, who art in a colander, drained be your noodles. Thy noodle come, thy sauce be yum, on top of some grated parmesan. Give us this day our garlic bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trample on our lawns. And lead us not into vegetarianism, but deliver us some pizza, for thine is the meatball, the noodle, and the sauce, forever and ever, ramen. We were there first. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Arr. Now, let's be more serious. There's absolutely no doubt that the world isn't getting hotter. Here's the evidence for it. And there's no doubt at all that the number of pirates has drastically fallen. Now, you're going to say association doesn't prove causation, but look at this. Look at this. Somalia, the highest density of pirates in the world and the lowest carbon emissions in the world. Coincidence? I think not. So, stop global warming, become a pirate. Now, there are a number of sects. There are 21 different Pastafarian sects. The two biggest groups are Orthodox and Liberal. So, for example, the Liberal or Reformed Pastafarians believe in what's called automated creation, which is the idea that the flying spaghetti monster sparked the creation of the universe with a single event, the Big Boil, and then let natural processes eventually create life. The Orthodox Pastafarians, on the other hand, believe that the flying spaghetti monster deliberately and literally created all things. Now, you know I'm a vegetarian, but can you be a vegetarian and a vegan if you're a Pastafarian? Because it does involve meatballs. The answer is there is no need to be a vegetarian. There's no need to be a vegan, because meatballs at a microscopic level, at a subatomic level, at the level of nuclear physics, is made of pasta. All matter is ultimately made of pasta. So there is no such thing as meat. Now, what evidence do I have for this? Well, it's called spaghetti string theory. And it's very advanced, and it proves that everything is made of pasta. And here, if you don't believe me, is a more complicated example. So you've got the flying spaghetti monster going into the wormhole, or spaghetti hole as it's called, and you get the big boil and everything like that. Okay. Also, Higgs bosons and his noodliness are surprisingly similar. I mean, this is pretty hard evidence. You don't get this from Christianity. So, the flying spaghetti monster is the one true God. Beware of impastors. This is one of the sayings. Flying spaghetti monster, please give me the hunger to eat the pester I can, the humility to accept that I can eat no more than when I'm too full, and the wisdom to remember where I live when I'm trashed on a Holy Friday. Fridays are holidays, as well as Saturday and Sunday. And this is, I think, where we end. This is basically be touched by his noodly appendages before it's too late. Join me. Leave humanism. Say all together. Rah. Rah. Okay, let's see.